And we are live with NextLitChat. I totally nearly said NaLitChat. I've been trying all afternoon not to screw that up, and I nearly did. This is the first live NaLitChat, or NextLitChat. See, I did it. Damn. This is the first NextLitChat ever that we've ever had. But it's kind of just basically NaLitChat. We're same folks. Similar conversations. We will broaden our category just a bit, and we're going to talk a whole bunch about that tonight. But we actually have a guest tonight. We have Becca Syme, author and frequent lit chatter with us. Becca, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you on. Like, you're one of those people I've seen on Twitter for, gosh, I want to say you've been chatting at least a year, right? Like, off and on. Yeah, I think at least a year. I always love having you people, like these people on air with us because it's just kind of like, it makes it real. Like, sometimes it feels like we live in this little online bubble where nobody really exists, but
I exist, I promise.
Right. Speaking of existing, we are joined on air tonight by Mr. Chris Fox. How are you, Chris?
Hello. Hey, hi. I exist too. I'm somewhere, but mostly on the internet. I might just be a figment of all of your imaginations.
Which would kind of be awesome, actually.
Yeah.
You'd be like, what is Microsoft's new Siri thing? Katana or Cortana? I don't know her name.
Yeah, Cortana.
Cortana. She's kind of creepy. I don't know. I think she's like the Halo chick. Like, what is
exactly. That's what she was inspired off of. And basically what I'm saying is I live in the cloud. If you need to send anything to me, I'm sure like Google Drive has a P.O. box.
Right. just P.O. box Chris Fox. So, tonight, we are going to hit on a myriad of discussions. We wanted to do audio tonight for a couple of reasons. One, we haven't done one in a while. Two, we're going through some changes within NaLitChat. As we mentioned, we are now calling ourselves NextLitChat, and we will go into exactly what that means. But part of that discussion has to do with new adult fiction, something that we've all obviously been very passionate about for the 3+ years that we've been doing NaLitChat. Where it's at, sort of what's happening with it, how it's evolving. And I do tend to look at it, we'll preface this whole conversation by saying, I tend to look at it as an evolution, so let's not get too crazy, but we will address, is new adult fiction dead? I'm waiting for Becca to give the noise.
Dun, dun, dun.
There it is. Every time we said that, like that to come out. So anyways, we will talk about those things. But first, Becca, can you tell our listeners and our Twitter followers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I write what I refer to as new adult historical, which is basically coming of age. So that's next lit, very applicable for me, stories. And I happen to write Highlanders, and so that's kind of what most people know. But all of my heroes and heroines, well, not all heroes, I should say, but all of my heroines are somewhere between 17 and 19, and our coming of age stories are kind of my thing. That's what I like to write. So, and I write suspense also, but that's for adults. So yeah.
Definitely genre fiction, which is why I think you're a really good candidate for this discussion tonight. Most people, I think, understand that new adult fiction sort of started as primarily college, so like seemed like every story took place in college, and they were definitely most of them on the sexy side. But over in NA Alley, there was a group of people, and I really do think they were some of the first people to really start pushing new adult as a category, where you could put genre fiction into it. So you could write historical new adult, and you could write sci-fi, and you could write all this other interesting stuff. And sort of that's where NaLitChat evolved from as well. Like, we kind of started this chat with that mindset that, new adult could be lots of things. It didn't just have to be, sex in college or whatever. It could be tons of different things. And honestly, media, I think, in general, has sort of jumped on board with this. You've got tons and tons and tons of these shows featuring young adults, not YA, but like actual young adults, 18, to 25-year-old characters, living life, doing the things that people that age do, getting apartments, and why I say doing things, people fighting crime like the Arrow, like it's not really what most of us do. Inheriting billion-dollar corporations, just standard things that 20-year-olds do. Actually, I live close to Silicon Valley, so that's not really out of the norm here. There are a lot of 20-year-olds inheriting billion-dollar corporations. I was not one of those. I ate ramen and was very poor when I was in my 20s. But so that's part of what we're going to talk about tonight. sort of where New Adult came from, where it's going, just lots and lots of stuff. I think you'll love NextLit as we pitch it and we tell you guys kind of what the mindset is behind it. I think you're really going to be on board with it. It's going to be a lot more inclusive. It's going to be a lot more involving of other categories and genres of writers in lots of different ways. So it's good. Chris, is there any news from Twitter?
Poppy Syme is I suck at pronouncing things. I'm sorry, Poppy, but Poppy is ahead on her Nano, as am I, and this is always good news in this very, very busy time. And Patricia is doing some knitting, so she won't be able to talk much, but we love you. I know you're out there.
Yay.
But the good news is still trickling in, just like Kat, who says my good news is her book arrives in 3 days, and she's ahead on Nanowrimo. So we're all ahead. So far, all of the news is that everyone's ahead on Nano. So if you haven't said so, then feel free to whine to us, and we will relate to how horrible it is to be behind.
Right. Now this is the time. This is absolutely the time to brag and to really pat yourself on the back about Nano, because by my clock, by the end of next week is when the drinking starts.
Yeah, for perspective, I've never been ahead on a Nano in the first week. Never. This is the first time it's ever happened in like 7 years.
That's awesome. I find a lot of people are really excited. They get jazzed. I see it on my Facebook feed, like pouring through. Hey, I hit my word counts today. Hit my word counts. And then by week 2, there's a lot of, I missed the day today, but I got up early, or yesterday, and I got up early today, and I got my words in. And then by week 3, they're like, holy shit, I've got to fix Thanksgiving dinner in a week. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. My kids are dying from some plague they've inherited from school. It's like a whole thing. Week 3, that's when it all goes off the rails. So get those word counts. Do it now. Get ahead.
Yes.
It all goes downhill after the first week. Sorry, I'm that gloomy Gus here. Go back to.
That's reality, though. It's reality.
Right. In full disclosure, I've never done Nano. Like, I've never done it, but I really enjoy this time of year. Everybody gets so excited about it. Like, I love it.
I figured you had at least tried it.
No, I've never done it.
Interesting.
It's just mostly timing wise for me. Like, I've always been curious about it, and I think probably one of these years I'll be sitting here at the beginning of November and not have anything to work on.
Oh yeah, it was the hardest thing back when I was in university, because this is finals. Finals happen in like 2 weeks, and it's just like I can't commit to this. It's like I could do it for the first 2 weeks, and then nope, that third week is just gone. It does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
But
and
for me,
Thanksgiving and
just like thinking about it, it's like all of that's out of my mind right now. It's just like, oh, I can hit my word count every day. Just riding that optimism wave.
You're an idealist. That's good.
And I know, like, it's acceptable for you to do, like, I've seen people do Nano with revisions. Like, so basically they've already got a finished novel, but they needed to bulk it up, or they needed, and so they just, because it's not, what is Nano? Is it 60,000 words? What's the
50,000 words.
50,000. That's not much. Like, I mean, honestly, a lot of the, especially if you write romance and stuff like that, or historical romance particularly, like, those bad boys can get up to 130,000 words pretty easily, so.
Yeah.
50's not all that huge, so I've known people that do that. I just can't. Like, I think it would break my process, and that's my problem with.
Yeah, it's just managing like that sort of word count, which is reasonable, but on a tiny, tiny time frame.
Yes.
So, well, my thing is, I can't do Nano with a project that's 2/3 of the way finished. Like, I can't get my brain. Like, I can't all of a sudden be like, oh, I got to hit these strict word count goals with whatever this is. And that's where I've had trouble with, because I'm always in the middle of a project. Every Nano I've come to in the last 3 years, I'm already working on something I need to get done. And so I can't really stop that and jump on board with something brand new. But one of these years, I do think it'll happen. I think I'll be able to. I'll just magically end up in November and be like, I've written everything I know how to write. It's time, Nano. It's time. Oh. Uh-oh. Poppy Syme says, E.J. Wesley, drinking starts next week. Oh, I'm ahead on that too.
You're ahead.
She's ahead on her word counts and her drinking. Everything is falling in line nicely for Poppy. All right, so let's jump to our first little bullet point tonight. I know the one many people are most interested in talking about. Is new adult fiction dead?
Dun, dun, dun.
I love it. You get to come on every week and do that.
Yes, I'll be the sound effects in the background.
So part of what has spurred this next lit conversation is based upon some things I had heard from agents, and Becca and I were visiting on Twitter one night. It's been many weeks back, but sort of about she had attended some conferences and such, and things that you were hearing, Becca, too, from panels of editors and agents at various conferences. So can you tell us a little bit about like where were you, kind of what was the discussion, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah, I was at RWA, Romance Writers of America National Conference, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with RWA, it's right around 2,500, romance authors and editors, agents, and it happened to be in New York City this year, so there was a huge overflow of industry people who were there. So basically every chat and every panel was just packed, with industry people. And it was really interesting because we had a conversation at the young adult chapter meeting that was based on the panel that had happened, where they had these 5 industry people, and they were all big name people, editors and agents. And somebody said, "Is NA dead?" And they all were like, "Well, it doesn't really exist." And one of the editors said, "Yeah, for us it doesn't exist." And I was like, hang on a second. Like, can you explain that? And basically her comment was, it's not young adult, and so it's adult, which means for us, we shelve NA or think of NA in terms of adult fiction. And I was like, yeah, but hang on a sec, because of course there are many of us who are selling gangbusters in new adult right now. And she was like, well, but for us, and she meant for industry people, the label is useless. It doesn't exist for us. And everyone on the panel was like, yes, 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 exactly, she's right. Which just shocked the pants off me. I mean, I was so shocked, and immediately went to Twitter and was like, what the hell, people? And EJ was like, yeah, we've heard the same thing. So it really surprised me to hear that from industry people.
Right. And so it's interesting thing is that you can't, where there truly is a dividing line between this. So there is what traditional publishing thinks and has to say, and then there's what indie authors are experiencing, like in the real world. And like you said, there are lots and lots of authors that are being very, very successful right now, labeling their material as new adult. Lots of readers I know actually got a tweet from, let's see, it was from, scroll through my list here. The Book Duchess is from @BookDuchess, basically saying that she didn't think new adult was dead because that's all she reads. Like that's really her reading list is all what people would call new adult material. So I think that I had a similar experience as Becca. Like I talked to an agent and said pretty much the same thing, that like I was working on this like new adult, what I called new adult college, kind of burgoying into college kind of story, a contemporary. Not a sexy kind of new adult, just kind of a contemporary story about this kid, road tripping to college or whatever. And she basically is like, it either has to be YA to pitch it traditionally, or it has to be commercial adult fiction. So when we talk commercial adult fiction, you're thinking things like, especially like contemporary commercial adult, maybe things like Nicholas Sparks or stuff like that. Some people kind of lump Nicholas Sparks into like romance, but he's not. Right. Yeah, he definitely doesn't. And so that's kind of what the idea behind like adult commercial fiction would be. Something I'm trying to think of something else, like maybe like the Night Circus, maybe some things like that potentially. Might be some, because that's got some fantasy elements in it, I think. But
there are even people out there who would say things like The Hunger Games is really not YA, or like we'd said before, John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, is because they're really coming of age post family being their major influencers.
Right.
Their comments at conference were very much like, no, we still want the stories, like they weren't saying don't send us the stories because there's obviously a market for them. But they were basically saying, like, the title of calling something new adult for them was just not something that they were hearing.
Right.
That it just especially from booksellers with bookshelf space and stuff like that. So that's just so interesting to me.
Well, Chris, what about you? Like, what have you noticed anything, like any shifts in what people are calling new adult, or how people are tackling it? I mean,
I've seen we've seen the general evolution of new adult since like we first started getting together and talking about it. Like all of us trying to figure out what new adult is and where it's going and all that. At the same time, I've always said, like ever since one of these chats that I was on, that the industry for publishing is extremely inflexible, and that's why they're so resistant to the idea of new adult being a thing. And you see some places where new adult has happened, like there's the new adult category on Amazon. That's huge. But at the same time, at large, there wasn't really a big push to like make new adult a thing except from the indie space. And the indie space is huge now. That's why there's so much success there. But it is this weird tug of war where there's clearly a market, but the publishing industry doesn't want to fill that market, but also wants to fill that market just by their own terms, whereas everyone else wants to just kind of write and do whatever, like us, because we just want to write good stories. We just want to make sure they get to the right audience. So it's just like, it's a weird gap in the market that they're bridging, but like with a wooden bridge as opposed to like a concrete bridge.
Right. So I don't know exactly what the big takeaway is from that. Becca, in your words, would you call new adult dead?
Oh, I mean, I would not call the stories of new adult dead because for sure there's a huge market for it. And like we said, there's a huge difference if you're an indie author versus if you're trying to go the traditional route. So if I have a story that is what we would call new adult, or and certainly anybody can call it whatever they want, but if you're writing indie books and publishing on your own, you have way more control over what you call it than if you are a traditional published author.
Right.
Because a traditionally published author doesn't get to decide where their book gets shelved and what genre it's called and how you market it and things like that. That's something that your marketing team at your publisher does for you. So I think it might just kind of depend on the direction that you decide to go with your coming of age or next lit story.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that would sum up my definition of my answer to is it dead or is it not dead? I would say it's not dead. I just think we're seeing it evolve into something new. I think, and I agree totally with, like, it depends on, what you want to do with it. I think if you're trying to market your story that you believe is like a new adult story, you've got a protagonist, and I think the definition is pretty much the same, like, that 18 to 26-year-old-ish protagonist, going through these life markers, maybe they're moving out, maybe they're, separating from home and family for the first time, on those kinds of deals, whether it's sci-fi or whatever, like I think we're all still talking about the same thing. But I think if you're one to pitch that to an agent or try to sell it traditionally, it's not going to be called new adult. And from the things I heard directly from an agent, this is not somebody like, that's not an agent, you just don't do it. Like when you query that stuff, you don't put new adult in it. Like if you've written a sci-fi adventure story that you definitely think has what we consider like these new adult themed elements, you pretty well got to decide when you pitch that, is it going to be like a YA type, like an upper, more mature YA story, or is it going to be like adult science fiction? Like that's basically, from a traditional standpoint, what I've heard.
I think it's important to say, like, we need to listen if we're pitching to traditional publishers or agents. We need to listen to them when they tell us,
yes,
don't pitch this way, because we want to get them to say yes, and so we need to say whatever we need to say. They obviously still want great stories, but it's just different when you get to have all of the control over your own stuff, and then you can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself.
Right, and it's one of the beautiful things about being an indie author. Like you do have that ability to do that, to say, you know what, screw this, I'm going to call it what I want, and put your money and your time where your mouth is, kind of deal, and back that up. And I think I do want to reiterate too that, like, formerly NaLitChat, now NextLitChat, like we've always been, and Becca and I were talking about this off air before we started. I've really always wanted us to be like an accepting, open chat group, meaning we love traditionally published books, we love indie published books, we love both kinds of authors. We really want to support everybody, and so anytime we say something like that, it's not like we're trying to downplay indie publishing or anything like that. It just means that, like Becca said, like if you submit a query to an agent, if that's how you want to go, like we want you to be successful at it. Yeah. That's the big thing. Like and it truly is my whole thing as an author with other writers and authors, is I just want to see your books in print, man, because it's one of the greatest things I've done with myself in my life that I never ever thought I would be able to do. And so I don't care how you get it done. But that being said, I think you just need to be aware of that if you're pitching NA to traditionally. If you do call it, if it is like a kind of a sexy, because that's really in their eyes the only kind of, what I've heard is the only kind of new adult that really still exists to them, is sort of that college, hyper sexy, like 50 Shades, kind of erotica, college erotica, for lack of a better term. That's really all that exists, and even if that's what it is, they're going to try to shovel it towards more like adult romance. That's basically a niche of adult romance now.
Yeah, I actually had because I of course write in one of those genre fiction areas in writing historical new adult, and I had a conversation with an agent about my own story that I was pitching to her, and she was basically like, yeah, I don't want to hear that. Because, of course, I start off everything. New adult historical. She's like, no. Just tell me the story. Which was really interesting, because it's like she wanted to still hear if it was a good story or not.
Right.
But she did not want me to use that. Whereas I'm going to continue to call my indie published new adult historical, for sure we'll still continue to call it new adult, because that's how my fans sort of know it. But when I pitch to New York, because I do have a series that I want to pitch to New York, I will now not call it that, because I've been chastened successfully.
Well, and the agent I talked to, she was very nice about it, but she's a business lady, so she's very just like, matter of fact, this is what it is, And again, when I first heard it, it kind of rankled my feathers a little bit. I've been as big of a new adult as a category, as a broad thing that you can't define this, you can't put it in a box, whatever, blah blah blah. I've been as big a champion of that as anybody, and so it was really, I was like, oh man, it stung a little bit, like when she did it, but
I know.
But once I got over it, I like you said, like I started listening to what was being told to me, and it wasn't a slam, it was just a matter of fact. That's just how that part of the industry views it right now.
Yeah, and it's important to say that this is a business, and it is the industry saying how the business should be. Right now, they just get to make the rules, and there's lots of little places that can make little like niches and little places for things like a category that is defined strictly as new adult. That's what's on the category sign to be. That's it. It can exist, but as an industry and business prospect, it's very hard to sell to readers who don't really know what it is and don't really take the time to learn necessarily. Because, again, in the 90s, when young adult was becoming a thing, there was a lot less media to consume. Now there's so much media to consume we could never consume it all. And the publishing industry is trying to whittle down genres to easily definable categories, and having new adult next to young adult, confusing. So that's just their choice.
Yeah.
Well, I think, when new adult really got huge, I think it was about 2013. So 2012 was when like NA Alley started and a bunch of that stuff. It became more than a blip on people's radars. It was well after they did, St. Martin's or whatever did the the big contests, for somebody to actually write what they called new adult and all that kind of stuff. Then in like 2013 is when it really took off, and there was a Nightline special on it where they interviewed some ladies that were really popular at that point and still popular authors. But they coined it as sexy YA, like they're writing the sexy young, like sexy fiction for teens, basically is what they called it, I think, in the Nightline special, which is totally off base. Like most of these new adult stories like that, they're not for teens, they're not written by teens, that's not the intent. So it's just interesting, like how this has all evolved and kind of drifted. Is there anything going on Twitter, Chris, that we should know about?
Mostly just people discussing this weird trend that we've seen. Like it's let's see. Jody says the media only talked about NA when 50 Shades of After is talked about. And again, it's that idea that something fits in the category that we've defined as authors as new adult, but the industry sees something like 50 Shades of Grey not as a new adult, but an adult fiction, an adult romance. So it's just this. It's not necessarily that. Again, it's not that they don't want these stories to exist. It's that they don't exist within the publishing structure that exists at the moment.
Right. And we'll do some diligence. We'll dig around. We'll find an indie author or two to come on air with this at some point here in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and then, again, like you were just about to say, Marie Meyer says, I write NA contemporary romance for a traditional publisher. All 3 of my books were pitched as NA. And it's just that thing. Some people want NA to exist. And on the whole, there's the biggest publishers say it's a pop trend. So it's not that our opinions on NA are invalid, because they're extremely valid. And it's important because we discovered a market that didn't exist before. But this is all a discussion of the perspective of traditional publishers and how they see the world. But those traditional publishers, they tend to make a lot of money, more money than I have. So their opinion is very valuable, and valuable both in content and money.
For somebody like Marie, and it's very valid that not only does she write contemporary romance NA for a traditional publisher, but they were pitched as NA also, that there are people out there who are going to accept that for sure. But just the comment that they made to us when we were talking to these editors after the panel was over, when all of them said, don't pitch me NA, don't pitch me NA. And they made it sort of sound like when we actually talked about the genre, it was, we already have the people writing that we, like sort of like we've got the people that we want writing it. I still want to hear about your story, but they are not going to necessarily market it. And of course, we all know about traditional publishing. They work 2 years ahead. So we might have sold books 2 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, today, that they don't necessarily want to get pitched the same kind of thing that they were getting pitched 2 years ago. And so that there's also a time difference, I think, in traditional publishing that's unique to that industry.
Right. Well, and as you said, there are definitely, I'm sure you can find publishers out there that are publishing NA. I'm sure of it. Yeah. And not only they're publishing it, they want it. Because they're smart people. Like those people probably know how to market it and how to get it to their audience. Of whatever. But yeah, so I don't think NA is, like I said, the material, the concept of new adult is for sure not going anywhere. For sure not. Like it's just too popular right now. Like every month, 2 months, there's like another movie coming out, like a Perks of Being a Wallflower or whatever, based on these books that are wholly kind of not, they're YA, but like the upper YA fringe stuff, like you said, Hunger Games, that kind of stuff, that could easily fall bits of it into the adult category. And those are kind of tweener books, and I mean, we'll see. I don't know what comes of it. At some point there could be an indie book pop out somewhere that calls itself new adult, is absolutely 100% new adult, and it's Star Wars basically, and it gets huge, and so that might just change the whole paradigm at that point. I can't
exactly like there needs to be something that acts as the bastion for NA if it were to exist on a much larger scale, produced by a big publisher. So like a Harry Potter or a 50 Shades of Grey that's explicitly sold as new adult. That's what would really change a lot of trends.
Yep.
Whether we'll see that or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just.
Because we've said that since the beginning. It's like one day it will happen, and it just hasn't. And that's not a bad thing. People are writing all the time, but it hasn't happened. So the traditional publishing industry won't change until they see a reason to change. That's just how they do. It's pushing a boulder up a hill.
Yep.
So let's venture in and let's start talking about this whole idea of adult, quote unquote, adult coming of age fiction. I consider new adult as part of that. I think what we've all been writing is new adult, even the sexy 50 Shades stuff, whatever. I think that's all. It's about a young woman coming to terms with her sexuality and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're all talking about the same things there. So I think new adult for sure. We've mentioned like Hunger Games, which and some of these like Fault in Our Stars, some things that we might call upper YA. And I wonder if anybody on Twitter, like, if you guys have some examples of like favorite upper YA, like more mature YA stories, kind of coming of age stories. I'd love to hear some of those if you can tweet them out to Chris or whoever. And then we've talked about a little bit with Becca what she's writing, sort of like historical romance, those types of things. So we start talking about we fall into like adult genre fiction. What about Becca? Do you have any? Like, what are your favorite, like, what you would term? I just wrote for the NextLitChat's newsletter that comes out next week. I had to pick 10 movies from the 80s that basically, like, coming-of-age movies that defined a generation. And I grew up in the 80s, so it was totally fun. But it was really damn hard. Like, I was going through, like, Ferris Bueller and all these, like, fantastic movies, Dead Poet Society.
Oh, yeah.
All these really great Dirty Dancing, like, all these great coming-of-age Karate Kid, like, tons of them. There's tons of them. Yeah. I really feel like the 80s is that decade. But so to you, like, what are your ultimate like coming of age stories, and where would you say they fall? Do they fall more new adult, YA, upper YA, or like?
That's really hard because I do think that for me at least, I don't know what other people think, and I'm certainly willing to be argued with because I am okay with being argued with. But I tend to feel like the line for me between YA and NA is the role of society or parental influence in it. So, like, for me, the reason I would think of something like The Hunger Games as being more of a new adult book or a new adult-ish upper YA book is because she's the captain of her own ship. Like, this isn't a coming-of-age story for her. She already came of age. And now she is essentially acting out of that age. Like, she's already really the provider for her family. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. So, like, right. I tend to like stories like that where people have to grow up early and, kind of be adults before they are really adults. So something like The 100, which is just my favorite television show probably until about 3/4 of the way through season 2, but like I love I have to qualify that, but like The 100 for me, like Clark's character before the book or the movie or TV show even starts, she is already basically a young adult. Like, she has come of age psychologically, really basically separated from her mother, having been in the situation she's in, and then she is acting out of that place when she's in the story. And that's because my books are like that. Like, all of my characters are learning how to separate from their parents or learning how to be not under society's thumb or that kind of thing. I tend to be attracted to stuff like The 100, which is like this super smart girl that everybody would look at and say, oh, she's so young, but she's really not young. You know what I mean? Like, she's an adult already. So I really love it. But The 100 comes to mind immediately. I love that.
Well, and that's a tale of, too, it's why I think that science fiction and fantasy and all these things can really have such a huge part to play in this sort of adult coming-of-age stuff, because it's cultural. Like, so your coming-of-age experience is culturally different for everybody. We can look back in the U.S. and, like, even generations past, like, most kids, I mean, like, where I grew up in Oklahoma, when my dad's generation, a lot of kids didn't make it past 9th grade. because at that point you were considered an adult. You had to get out and start working to help feed family. Like that was it. Like there wasn't any like more sort of gestating like in becoming an adult. You were an adult at that point. You were expected to get up and put in a full day's work and provide food for people. And that's just like, in the 50s or 40s, here in the U.S. kind of thing. So, but it's different everywhere. And the 100, I think that's a great point, that you get these characters in sci-fi, they can be 16, or like Katniss, like however old she was when that story started. I mean, it's just culturally different for everybody. It's contextually different. I like the example you gave because I think it shows sort of the breadth that this whole adult coming of age stuff can take, because I bring up the show Girls on HBO a lot, and that's definitely like a new adult type of that kind of story. She's at the opposite end of that spectrum. Like she's at the age where like she should be grown up by now. Like she should like have her shit together, but she doesn't. And so I look at the juxtaposition of those two types of characters, because you can have a character that's maybe a little on the younger side that has to grow up too soon, basically, has to take this role and basically becomes an adult now. And then you could all jump it all the way contextually to the other end of the spectrum and say you've got these 25, 26-year-olds that have, master's degrees.
That are not yet.
They can't take care of themselves because they're hopeless. So.
Yeah, we have a lot of people on Twitter agreeing. Like Kat also references the 100. She also references Stardust, the Scorpio races, and Cassandra Clare. All of Claire's writing. I can't talk. That's fine. But Sarah Alunve, God, I'm just sucking words. Alunve on Twitter also says she references manga, and this is another thing that like relates to my perspective on like the style that I wrote with. I guess most of it would either be classified as NA or upper YA, because my definition goes by tone, and I've said that quite a bit, because the tone of the reading and stories that I like is much more mature than what normal like YA tends to offer. I don't need like kids, getting their first kiss. That does nothing for me anymore. I'm old now. But stuff where people of that age or just a little older are struggling with like really harsh conditions or things that are super confusing for someone of their age to deal with is super interesting. So something like The Hunger Games, she has to deal with killing people. That's not okay. Stuff like Skins or Life is Strange, where it's these situations of people dealing with the complexities of life and all the intricacies that connect different people and how to actually like socialize in a way that makes sense. Or taking like a sci-fi example, you have something like Evangelion. The characters in that are all 14 years old, but they are dealing with murder and violence on such an extreme level that it's hard to justify calling that just young adult fiction, because I would never say, hey, you're 14, you should probably watch this, because you're going to be traumatized for the rest of your life.
Well, it's like Ender's Game being, I see it in Barnes & Noble and places occasionally, like in middle grade books. I'm like, what are you doing? Like horribly violent. Like it's terribly violent. That's definitely like an upper YA like minimum. Like to me, that book.
I think Poppy brings up an interesting point too, of that there's a difference between performing adult roles and actually being an adult. So like that line of new adult or YA, upper YA, coming of age, like I do think that NA tends to be, like Chris said, there's more room for darker, there's more room for more complexity kind of for the readers. I think we tolerate that. People don't want to think about 16-year-olds because of our culture today. Like I get this all the time from editors about my heroine is 16, in this most recent book I put out, it was called Kata's Rogue. My heroine is 16 years old, and I have an editor who used to be at a major publisher, and she was like, you cannot say in your book that your heroine is 16, because she's sold into sex slavery and all these things happen to her, and she's like, you can't say she's 16 because you're breaking all these rules, basically, of like, they have to be 18 years old. And I was like, well, it's realistic in that time period that she would have been that way. And she basically said to me, like, I don't care. You
Right.
can't say. So I literally took her age out and just didn't say what her age was, but she's still 16. Like, let's be realistic. That kind of stuff happens to kids all the time, and so there has to be room in fiction for that to happen and for us to realistically deal with, what that's like.
Right. Which is it was what's been beautiful about this sort of the blooming of new adult, and like so many people gravitating and really clutching onto that idea of writing these kinds of stories, because I think for a long time, and it's not just new adult, but the beautiful thing about indie publishing in general really helped spur a lot of that on, because there was a lot of sterilization of things that went on because
Yep.
certain demographics couldn't read it or wouldn't read it, supposedly, or whatever. And indie publishing particularly has just blown that all to hell all time and time again. They find readers. Like, you can write, my goodness, as a popular topic on NextLitChat over the years has been dinosaur porn. There's always, I mean, that exists, people. Like, that is a thing.
That's my fault.
I do think it is.
It is entirely my fault. I've mentioned it a couple times and it just stuck around. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it was Chris that brought that up originally. But, so, yeah, there's a reader for everything. Just like there's somebody for everyone, there's a reader for everybody.
But it just speaks to the fact that, like, this upper YA right now, super popular. Stuff like Hunger Games, at least that tonal level or the
Yep.
complexity of the characters, people want that so much, and it's just because traditional publishing has lagged behind. They didn't do that for the longest time until people finally started writing that, and they're like, oh, people read that. Okay, we'll do that now.
Well, look what Harry Potter had a really hard time getting published originally because they thought it was too dark for a middle grade story.
There's too much magic. They're going to worship the occult. No,
And they just thought it was dark, like leading a story like basically a middle grade story off with like his parents dying and all this kind of stuff. Everybody just thought the editors thought the tone was too dark of it. The people that saw it and read it.
Indeed, and like for YA, that was one of those big paradigm shifts that said we can tell darker stories, because it started out as, we can look back at Harry Potter, the first books, and say, oh, that's pretty tame now, but back then it wasn't. And as the series progressed, it got progressively dark. Like, the last book is just the darkest stuff on the planet. It's World War II kind of dark. And after that came out, you saw a lot of YA stories that were much darker in context. Not necessarily the same context as Harry Potter, but they tried to do that. They tried to get that same tone within the YA structure, and I think that it speaks to volumes that there's lots of NA books that tried to do the same thing, and they just didn't rise to that level as Harry Potter. But can you really blame them for not being Harry Potter? I'm sorry.
Right.
Like, okay, I'm sorry you didn't win the Olympics. It's okay. You did good.
Well, and like it's just fascinating when you talk about things like Harry Potter and not being published and things, and that's what's so wonderful about the publishing world we're in right now, is there is an opportunity, I think, for books, that maybe don't fall into whatever box or whatever people want to put it into, that there is an opportunity for those to grow. I mean, you look at like the success of like Hugh Howey with Wool and some of these things, and just those books. I mean, it's sad to think about it, but 15 years ago they probably don't get published. And and thinking about the trend of like YA getting a little darker, a little more complex, I know there's sort of a social cultural thing after 9/11 that definitely parallels some of this. Like, I think particularly in the U.S., like our world got a little darker after that, and it's maybe it's morbid curiosity or whatever you want to call it, but as a culture, I think we definitely got a little more fascinated with these grittier. I mean, just look at TV. Look how much grittier TV has gotten since that time.
It's interesting. Marie brought up Rain, which we had talked about a little bit in a previous NA chat, and that to me, I don't know if do you guys watch Rain?
I haven't seen it. It's on like my endless queue of things to watch, but it's on my radar for sure because I've heard nothing but really good things about it.
Well, as a historical NA author, I think Rain is like my home planet kind of in television, and even though everyone's like, oh, it's so historically inaccurate, which I won't address that because we don't have time, but but for me, Rain is a perfect example of this. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Rain doesn't get made, because it's just not okay for us to think about teenagers in our culture being in those kinds of situations. Like really, the king in Reign was in this really dark, crazy sexual relationship with a very, very young girl. And and it was like they just went there and they really were honest about it. And the teenagers who were on the show knew about it and they dealt with it. You know what I mean? It was so interesting to watch this because I'm like, this is basically what I write. Like I basically write Reign, and I'm like, I love that this exists now because I love that we're being honest about where teens and young people and young adults and early 20-somethings are at, and we're not trying to sanitize things for them anymore. Like we're being honest, I guess. I like that.
Reign's getting a lot of support on Twitter, by the way. Poppy says she watches Reign a delight, she calls it.
I love Reign.
Which, Poppy, it sounds a little dark to be calling it a delight. Okay. I haven't seen it, but I'm a little disturbed by this. Kat says she also adores Reign. This is an interesting sort of change. February Grace says that she's why she watches so little TV anymore because everything is so dark and violent. And I do think that has become increasingly a challenge. And we may totally shift back. Like people may get so inundated with just so serious and so dark. I mean, because you look at shows like Walking Dead and Breaking Bad, for instance, like what AMC's doing on technically a non-pay channel. Stuff like that could exist on HBO and Showtime for years if they wanted to, because they could just do that kind of stuff. But these are like regular cable television, and that's dark, like violent, gory stuff. And even just regular ABC, NBC, Fox, your typical stations, even their shows, the cop procedurals and stuff, have gotten a lot grittier. I remember like how everybody freaked out and was it NYPD Blue and what's his name showed his butt on TV and it was such a huge deal. And like now I'm like, seriously, like we just blew that all to heck. Like
that's nothing.
Which is funny because like Anna Devey on Twitter says, question for NextLitChat. Considering Harry Potter, what would change the paradigm now for YA? So we exist in this current climate of where we want upper YA to exist in the NA category, but NA is not a category quite yet in the traditional publishing space. What would be a good paradigm shift to bring us to that point where people would take it more seriously? It's a good theoretical question.
So basically, if I'm trying to interpret this correctly, she's asking if...
What would be this generation's Harry Potter within the publishing industry?
Like one that exists or one that could potentially...
one that could hypothetically exist. It's one of those just like thought-provoking questions like, what could change it now? But it's not one of those ones that necessarily has an answer.
I could see definitely superhero stuff. Superhero stuff is really popular right now, and it seems to have pretty free reign. You can make it as dark or light as you possibly could want it to be. So I could see that. I could see like a truly like a superhero something, kind of breaking those bounds. Everybody's so enamored with superhero things right now. You just can't do anything wrong with it. So that'd be my guess. Like if I had to guess, just take a wild stab at something that would catch fire. Maybe like a college superhero team or something like that. I don't know.
Someone needs to go write that. I can hear all the pens scribbling right now of everyone.
There's your nano shift for you. Just drop what you're doing. Start writing college. We have like Starla Hutchton that we've had on air before and stuff. There are authors out there writing that stuff. There are some authors writing sort of new adult theme style superhero things. But I think it's just one of those ones that's like you just got to get the right attention brought to it. One of them gets made into a good movie or something like that, it'll be huge. I mean, because you look at like Kick-Ass, like the show Kick-Ass, like that was teenage characters, not a kids movie.
Indeed. Like you also see the same thing. You remember Golden Compass, the movie?
Yep.
Remember how bad it was?
Yeah, it was not good. I love the books.
Philip Pullman, the writer, agrees that movie was terrible, and he's signing up with BBC to produce a miniseries for British television, all about his Dark Materials.
I saw that, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's
it's one of those things where there's a market. It's there. They need something to fill that market, and it needs to be from big names. So it makes me curious, like why. What is the idea behind NextLitChat? Where are we going with all this?
Which is an excellent question. where we're going with all this is to try to encompass all of the things that we've been talking about tonight. So we've covered a lot of bases. We've covered, like I said, adult genre fiction. We've covered upper YA. We've covered new adult things. NextLit is, and I'd like to direct people to nextlit.com. That's sort of our landing page for the chat too. You can find us nestled in the transcripts from the chats and all that kind of good stuff is nestled within that. But if you read the tagline we've developed for that, and again we fall kind of under this whole NextLit thing. It's coming of age fiction for the next generation, and so it's basically what's next. And the definition we put on that website is we view coming of age fiction as a niche encompassing 3 different categories of literature: upper young adult, new adult, and select adult titles. At their core, these books aim to capture the transition between adolescence and true adulthood. Simple as that. And I really think that is truly I think that's what this is all about, is sort of defining new adult and trying to direct people to exactly what is new adult, what isn't new adult. It got really complicated. And this is sort of, I think, a process of ours to try, let's not make it so complicated. We can call it whatever. Like if you want to call yours upper YA because you need to pitch it to an agent, that's fine. Call it upper YA. That's awesome. If you're an indie author and you've got a fan base that loves what you're writing and you call it new adult, that's awesome too. But it's sort of this mindset of that we're focusing on these characters that do fall in these 16 to 30 kind of whatever range that people want to lump them into. We have to broaden that out drastically when you start talking fantasy stuff. But like when they fall into that age range and they're experiencing these things for the first time, living away from home, going to college, going to get their first real job, maybe their first serious relationships, like serious relationships. Not necessarily, it could be first sexual encounters, could not be first sexual encounter, it could be many, of many sexual encounters they've had, but maybe it's the first time they've truly fallen in love, as an adult, fallen in love, not kid love. And so these are the things we're looking at. It's all these sort of broad encompassing broad strokes, and I think that's what NextLit's really all about. From my perspective, is let's just broaden our strokes. Like we don't have to really put ourselves into any kind of box or whatever. Because we, as Chris pointed out, because I ran this by all the chat guys, that work and help us put the chat on. And before I get out of here, I do want to say thank you so much to Kat Van Sil in Twitter tonight for locking that down. We had a couple people. We had one person on vacation. Amy's on vacation. Lindsay's out sick, and so we were shorthanded tonight, and everybody just pitched in. It was awesome. But as Chris had mentioned to me, when I brought this up to them to get their, what they thought about if we changed the name and do all this, Chris brought up that, we talk about YA all the time at this chat. Like we love YA fiction. Like there's no doubt. Like if you spent much time at NextLitChat, you know how much that we adore like these stories, because YA is just NA is just an extension in my. It's always been that way in my mind. Like I've known people like, oh, it's either NA or YA because there is some upper YA that some NA people claim, and that some YA people claim, and so there's always been a little bit of a tug of war back between those two. But to me, I'm like, that doesn't need to happen. Like it's just all these great coming of age stories that we love so much, and so hell, we make the rules, so we'll talk about what we want.
Exactly. Like Sarah says, I don't do upper YA, NA, or adult. Rather, I prefer concepts that challenge categories with crossovers. And NextLitChat seems like the ultimate crossover. It's what we've talked about all the time. We can't shut up about this stuff, about both stuff that fits in YA, upper YA, new adult, and adult. It's all crossed over. Right. We can move these stories wherever we want them to, depending on the different type of discussion or debate or argument we're having. And it's really just the same discussion with a new name.
Yeah, I agree. It's an extension of the same discussion. We'll probably broaden it out. We'll purposefully tackle, because I think a lot of times in the past, we may have talked about YA as a side thing or whatever. We'll work harder to get guests on that represent some of these other areas, and we'll focus more on like adult genre fiction and some of these things that maybe we shied away from in the past because we didn't know where it would fit within our audience range. But
which is awesome as someone who writes in that area, because like honestly, in trying to market to NA, sometimes I always feel like I'm having to explain. Okay, no, no, nope, no, no, it's not 50 Shades. Nope, no. Okay, no, it's not that. Okay, but it's historical. So it's so nice to have a brand like this of NextLit to be able to say like, okay, I don't have to explain anymore.
Right.
That it's not that contemporary, sexy, college.
Right.
Kind of stuff, and I can just say like, okay, this is what I write and these are my stories, and I no longer kind of have to justify the fact that I'm in new adult, which no, I don't think anybody here ever made me feel that way, which I thank you all incredibly for. But I do feel that way in the industry a lot of just like, okay, you don't fit my little definition, so
Right.
I find a place to put you.
Right. Like, and that was my thing too, is like I felt like more and more I was seeing people and even myself like having to apologize for wanting to call something new adult or whatever. And
Yep.
look, we don't. That's not a struggle I don't think we need to fight with. I think we need to be aware as business people, as authors, and that kind of thing of what we're getting into. Like, but as far as like once we've written it and we love this thing, like who cares? Like it's my thing. I love it. And
Yeah, it's more of a personal struggle. Like, depending on the path your book takes, you might have to go one route or the other, and that will require you to do different things with the way that you talk about your book. You can believe whatever you want, and if you are releasing your book independently, do what you want. But something that is more broad like this accepts more people without the convoluted part of explaining why something should fit in a certain category.
Exactly.
The category isn't going anywhere. We're just broadening the scope of our discussion of the category and those surrounding it.
And I just unintentionally turned this into a Dr. Seuss book. I was like, it's my thing and I love it. You don't think so? You can shove it. So any closing thoughts? Becca, you have anything, last words of wisdom for anybody out there from stuff that, things you might have heard at conferences, would you suggest anybody give up their NA projects or anything like that?
Gosh, no. And that's just kind of a great way to end, too, is like those of you who are writing this and you're hearing, the whole like, is NA lit dead, dun dun dun, and you're freaking out, or that's not that is not the intention at all. And certainly if you feel like that's the direction you want to go, I don't feel like any agent is going to say no just because you call something new adult. You know what I mean? Like or an editor. I feel like a good story is a good story, and tell the story that you want to tell in the way you want to tell it, and let somebody else figure out where to put it if that's what it takes, and I also want to just give a shout out to my friend Chanel, who literally in the middle of NextLitChat had a baby, and I'm watching her kids, and she just texted me that she had the baby. So,
which is ridiculous.
Congratulations!
I know, I'm so excited.
Women everywhere are gonna hate her because like she literally like just before we went on air, like what, an hour, minutes, whatever.
An hour, yeah.
Like literally just went in the hospital. So she like, boom, like she has kids.
She has things to do.
She has children less time that it takes you to make your dinner. Sleep on that.
Right. That's not normal.
No, it's not. Yeah. No. Temper your expectation, ladies, if you haven't had children yet. Oh, I still get horror stories from my mom. I was in labor 4 days with you.
I know.
But, well, congratulations to her. I love that. We end on a very, very happy note. Always good news to hear that a baby's born safe and sound. So, well, to everybody out on Twitter, thank you guys so much. It's definitely a good opportunity to say thank you for hanging out with NextLitChat for, like I said, 3+ years now. As we transition to just kind of the next thing that we'll do, one thing, I mean, as far as if I'm involved in it, which I don't have any plans not to be involved in it, it's going to be friendly. Everybody's going to be welcome. It will occasionally be nonsensical. Most of the time we'll talk about, dinosaur porn or whatever.
Yeah, we'll usually end up talking about hot guys or Disney or something. It's just the same thing.
Or Doctor Who.
Or Doctor Who. Like, there's always a litany of, running gags we have here. But everybody's always welcome to jump in at any point. I can't tell you guys how much fun it is for me every week to show up and see, like, just familiar faces. It just makes me know that, we do have a supportive community and it is a fun place for people to come hang out. And that's really what it's all about. So hope all of you guys are safe throughout next week. We'll be back again next Thursday. Topic is pending. So we'll see. This spurred a couple of good ideas actually tonight, so maybe we can do something fun next week too. But
the topic you should go away knowing next week: do better on Nano and tell us how good you did.
Right. It's your nano check-in.
That is the topic for next week until we figure it out.
It's nano shaming. That's what we're gonna do. Yes. EJ told you. He told you you're gonna suck next week. So.
You gotta prove him wrong.
Right. You're gonna fall way behind. So, anyways, I'm EJ Wesley, and our guest has been Becca Syme, and we had Mr. Chris Fox with us here on audio, and we want to wish all of you guys a good night, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye.